And when were you born? Are you willing to tell us that?
March 18th, 1918, in that house.
In that house?
I was born on the farm, yeah.
And you say that this house is still standing?
Very definitely.
Do you happen to know the address?
It's on Independence Road. The house just before you get to Riles Lane. You see.
And did you say that you did not go to school in Wells? Is that right?
No, I went to Richland, which was on Independence Road towards 20.
But you had some interaction with the little town. Is that right?
Other than it wasn't a great while, they'd go down there at the store, and I don't know why, because I don't know that it was that much closer than what Albany was. And my dad come to Albany every week to the auction and to get a shave. My dad never shaved himself.
My goodness. So, when did your family hear that there was going to be a training camp built?
Well, it had to have been in 41. And then of course they started looking for another piece of property at
your parents did?
Yes, I think we were all notified that, you've got so many days or well, probably more. I don't know how many days it was. One thing, I know that officers came and talked to my parents and and of course then we had to have a big auction. You had all the farm machinery had to be sold. And of course my dad couldn't have run a tractor that he always farmed with horses. And we raised turkeys. And I was the one designated to sleep with the turkeys at night because there was so much stealing. And that was probably a whole block, because it had a barn on it. And we brought one cow to town.
Right, and that was in Albany.
Yeah.
And why did you bring the cow?
I think my dad had to have something to do because he was strictly, a farmer. He didn't, and of course there was a barn on the piece of property and enough for a cattle. And we probably brought my riding horse. One horse we sold to loggers because he bought a big price, I remember, at the auction, because he was one that was really good with when they were logging by horse.
How do you think this change affected your parents? How do you think the change affected your parents?
Oh, I think it affected my dad a lot worse. My mother was very energetic. She came in here, found a house, got a carpenter, and started remodeling it so that they could take the wives that came in here so they would have a place to stay. And it was usually a bed and bath and probably kitchen privileges.
For the soldiers' wives?
Yeah, soldiers' wives, yeah.
Oh.
And
yeah, that must have been a whole business.
It was a whole new business, and what she did, she'd buy one and fix it up. She'd buy another and fix it up.
Wow.
And this is what she did mainly the rest of her life.
My goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how she kept the family going then.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a brother who was drafted. No, he went to Pacific.
To the Pacific.
He was a CB and was one of them that run the lines in first.
Yeah.
But there was, you see, it went clear back to Sulphur Springs. It was a huge area.
Yeah.
And so I joined the service. And I joined the Coast Guard and I was stationed in New York City.
Really?
And if you don't think a country girl.
When did you join the Coast Guard?
Well, I went in 42, in March of 42, and came back in September of 45. It was a real adventure. One of 7 girls.
How did the change at in Oregon affect the way your family felt about the war?
I really don't know. I think my mother was enough, enterprising enough that it didn't bother her, but I know it must have bothered my dad an awful lot. But then he got used to going.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was an old hardware store downtown that the men gathered around the old pot-bellied stove in the back.
Yeah.
And I think he went there every day. It was something to do. And of course, he liked the auction, so.
But for him, that was his identity, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To be a farmer.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the day that you left.
An officer came over and we were killing the chickens to put in the freezer here in town. And here I was out there with old Shep the dog, go get the roosters, bring them to me, and I take chocolates out of them.
Yeah.
We Westerners weren't used to Southerners.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that probably part of it was that my boyfriend was in the service. And so, why not? I didn't have any real reason to stay.
Right.
As soon as my brother left, I could drive.
Right.
Couldn't until he did. But I could back that 4-wheel trailer anywhere. I now have trouble getting the car out of the garage.
It sounds like you take after your mother a little bit.
Well, I'm sure I do, because I still do 3 craft shows a year. I'm a collector of junk. But my mother was a collector of antiques. I run to that.
Men must have come from all across the United States.
Evidently. Yes, because I'm sure all of them weren't. But I guess one thing I thought about them being, of course, they spoke a different language. My mother always tells about the one that some friends of ours had come to visit, and the wife was nursing the baby in plain sight, which was not the thing to do.
What kind of impact do you think the camp had on the surrounding communities? Was there more crime? Was there more traffic? Was there more business? Was there less business? What kinds of things do you remember?
Well, there had to have been more business. As far as crime, I don't think so. Now, a lot of the girls dated out there, but that's one thing I never did.
One of the things you mentioned in your letter to the newspaper was that it took some time before the government paid your family for the property. Do you remember anything about that?
Other than I know we didn't have any money when we moved. All we had was the money that came off the auction to purchase anything, and the Bank of Albany loaned my mother money to buy the piece of property. How long before she got any money, because she was the financier, you might say. I know that my brother and I both sent money home on our $21 a month. You had to do it. You had no choice.
Right. Do you remember Pearl Harbor?
You bet.
Where were you? Were you already in New York by then?
No, I was still at home. We listened to the radio. Of course, as I say, I have seen so much change in my generations. Like I say, I haven't learned to run a computer, but I can run my computerized sewing machines. For matter of fact, we always went to the neighbors because they had a better radio than we did, to listen to some, I don't remember even what it was, but we listened to that. But very definitely we listened to all of it, Pearl Harbor, to find out what was going on. Unless you went to a movie house to see them, you had no idea of what was going on because there was no television at that time.
Right. Yep.
There was television before I left New York that I'd gone up to Radio City or someplace just to see what it was about.
And you probably knew people that were leaving.
Well, yes, because a lot of my friends were, like my brother was drafted, and a couple of the other friends, and of course then there was a couple of them that were farmers that got to stay. 20 or 25 of us in the one hotel that we worked for the district. And there were, some of them were drivers for officers and things like that, but I was the bookkeeper type, and so with storekeeper, and I did that the whole time I was there.
Yep. You were in New York for 2 years, about?
Yeah, 2.5 years. That is from March, 42 to 40, until September of 45.
Do you remember VE Day? What was that like?
Bad house. I think it took a cab probably an hour or so from to get to the railroad station to get me out of town.
My goodness.
Yeah.
So the streets were just packed.
Oh, they were packed.
Yeah.
But VE Day was worse yet than much worse than when Japan surrendered. Right. Yeah. Well, probably down on the streets with everybody else. We're wanting to see Eisenhower, and but when we were at boot camp, Mayor LaGuardia come to inspect our troops. We went to Hunter College. That's where the first, that was where boot camp for the Coast Guard was. And most of them all were then sent to different schools. There were 7 of us left off the list.
Oh, no.
What are we going to do with these 7 women? So, a couple of them were drivers for officers, and the rest of us went to the district office, and we had civilians that trained us then, and eventually I think there was only 2 civilians left in the office when.
I'll bet you had plenty to do.
Oh, yes, we had plenty to do, but can you imagine? At boot camp, we got 1 day's liberty, and of course, where do you go? Statue of Liberty. Mm-hmm. The other thing was that on Easter Sunday, all the Catholic girls went to St. Patrick's.
Oh, yeah.
And the rest of us went to St. Paul's. Episcopal, in Latin, of which none of us knew Latin. But, of course, when you go off the farm, you lose everything. Mm-hmm. And what little furniture and stuff that we brought. Mm-hmm. And
your whole way of life changed. Completely.
Mm-hmm. And yet you can tell that I'm still a farmer through my life. And all that I've still got that in my blood. And my granddaughter came and she cleaned part of it up and everything. And I said something to her that you were coming tonight. And she says, "You're going to wear what you got on." I had. Well, we pulled up the string beads. Mm-hmm. I had string beads stuck all over. Well, I say, well, don't call after 9 o'clock in the morning and not be home. And I'm still well, I get up early, but I don't navigate too good. So, yeah. But I belong to a couple of clubs and play pinochle once a month and bunco once a month and go to church. We didn't depend on the government to help us out. Now, I know that when, say, I was 12, 14, there was a family that lived close to us. I know it must have been a rental or something that we often took food. Mm-hmm. And I know my mother made me give up one of my dolls to the family. It was much more help each other, I think. Yep. And all. Mm-hmm. That's just one of the things that, well, when my husband got hurt, and well, it was just a case that I had to go to work. Mm-hmm. Yep. That you didn't ever think about. No. This business of sewing, that's a hobby with me. But it keeps me doing something. It keeps my brain active and stuff, although my body isn't doing what my brain's doing. And probably one of those telephone calls was, we are expecting, and she went into labor this noon. This will be my first great-granddaughter. Oh. That's wonderful. Yeah. And is the baby here? But it wasn't here, so I don't know whether the phone call might have been. Oh. The Democrat Herald came by. I was out working in the garden. Mm-hmm. Here came on the Saturday paper a whole article about me and my garden. Really? Yeah. That's great. And so you're famous. Yeah. Then I went down to pick up a prescription in Weimar, and the gal says, well, you're the rock star of Albany this week. We need more about Camp Adair.
Mhm.
I'm one of the survivors. That was also, there was very much a distinction in Corvallis High School. Country kids, city kids, and professors' kids.
Oh, yeah.
It probably still is. I don't know.
Country kids, huh?
And I was one of the country kids.
Yeah.
And the first day of when you went in on the ninth grade after 8 grades in a one school, and I suppose she was the health and science teacher. The bus kids stay for assembly. Tell us how to flush a toilet. We had always had, well, from the time I was 8 years old, we had had electricity and good plumbing and everything this way, and I couldn't quite understand why this was necessary, because we were country kids, why this was.
My word.
Yeah. Whether my family didn't have as much money, that is, a cash flow, you might say, I don't know, because my mother was very much never reveal any. But my mother was pretty secretive of stuff that went on, and maybe I didn't pay attention.
I can't imagine.